Howdy, howdy. Welcome back. Chapter 10. As you go through your chapter 10 in your text, you're going to notice that we're not going to cover necessarily all of the major, a lot of these components in great depth because they're not necessarily all going to be on the exam. However, I am going to try to make sure I talk about things that you could be helpful. Okay. All right. So, first, let's just talk about land use because this whole chapter is talking about public and private land. And so, let's start with going over how we in the United States use our land. So, this list is the major 6 ways that we use land here in the United States: residential development, industry, landfills, agriculture, recreation, and timber. And this website is, this picture is from a great website that you guys are actually going to do a little activity from to kind of help you better understand how we use our land and what is private versus what is public sourced. And you can kind of see here, this is kind of a summary as to what a lot of their research has and their data shows. So you can see how much of it is actually just for cows. How much is timberland, whether it is private or state owned or corporate owned. Then over here, you can also see how we use agriculture in other ways, what little of it we actually use to live upon, and even like goes and shows you how much is dedicated to for maple syrup and even Christmas trees and golf courses. It's kind of interesting picture there, I think. All right, so this is a review. I'm not even really going to talk about this slide. It's just you have to kind of keep in mind that this whole concept of tragedy of the commons is going to come back again and again, as I said, way early in the year. And it is, again, going to, we're going to see it again here. Okay, so just remember that basically, all in all, that if you have shared limited resources, they can very easily become depleted, as humans are greedy and we want money and short-term gain over helping to preserve the ecosystem from which we are taking those resources. This picture is from your book. Again, not really going to talk about it, but something that is related to this are what we call externalities. This is kind of an abstract topic in that when you think of externality, you think of the word external, it means outside. So, okay, so it's coming from the outside in, maybe? Well, what it is defined as, it can also be used in economics and some other areas of finance and stuff too. It's the cost or benefit of a good or service that is not included in the purchase price or of the product or the service. So it's like good customer service. That is a positive externality. Another example here is, let's say, bakery, Subway, restaurant, whatever, is right next to you. You wake up every morning smelling it. And if you like that smell, then that's a positive externality. However, if they wake you up super early every morning because they are trying to prepare for the day, but they are waking you up from your normal routine, then that is a negative externality. So externalities are things that happen outside that can affect you, and positive or negative ways is another way of kind of shortly saying this. And we do use these in environmental science because there's a lot of concepts here that relate to how humans interact with each other, how we interact with the rest of the biological world. And we are increasingly so, becoming more concerned about those negative externalities like pollution, water quality, things that can be caused by tragedies of the commons, such as overfishing and things like that. So here's a couple of examples of a negative and positive externalities that we can see in the environment. So maybe this will provide you with something a little bit more concrete based on what we are speaking about. So negative ones always have some kind of bad effect, right? Makes sense. So like I was saying earlier, all forms of pollution, are examples of negative externalities. Others would be situations where you are overstepping your boundaries, right? And reaching into like taking too much or over harvesting, those kinds of processes and concepts as well. Positive ones would be things like going into cities and revamping those buildings versus building outwards. Another positive externality could possibly be something along the lines of everybody getting immunized so that way they're not going to catch COVID or what have you. So there are positive externalities that work within the environment as well. All right, so this again, we're going to start talking about what we're talking about when we talk about public versus private lands. And so private and public lands, basically, there's some economists, especially fewer ecologists, but some that have this belief and this hypothesis that if you allow people to, own their own land, then they are less likely to experience over harvesting or evidence of tragedy of the commons, right? Because they believe that those people are going to be better citizens and better monitor what is rightfully theirs versus what is public and belongs to everybody. So some people also think that, but in supporting public and regulating public lands is that then that's why we have ordinances, we have regulations that we can put into place, such as harvesting or hunting regulations. Those kinds of regulations could possibly prevent that from, see if that can be of any assistance. Others also argue that commonly held resources can be managed at the community level. So, can people work together for the common good? I would say that history largely dictates no, but it is a hypothesis, it is a theory. Part of this, again, coming back to the tragedy of the commons and putting all of this together, is maximum sustainable yield. So, it is the most of a renewable resource that we can harvest or take without compromising the future availability of that resource. So I kind of live on the suburbs out in the west part of town, and they're constantly building. And my son was like, "Oh my gosh, Mom, why do they keep cutting down these trees to build these stupid buildings?" And I was like, "Well, because people are greedy and it makes a quick buck. They throw up a building, people pay rent on it, et cetera, et cetera." So he's like, "But Mom, people need the trees." So even a 9-year-old kind of gets it. And meaning that you have this very narrow line, especially for some resources that that we have to follow, so that we don't overreach, or also so that we do try to make sure that everything does stay sustainable. So in these two pictures, the one on the left down here is relating how you have time and population size and how we get up to carrying capacity, right? We know what this is. That here, where we have slow growth at the beginning, fast growth in the middle of this population size, because you have enough of that population to reproduce. And it looks like it's going to do so fairly quickly, even if the reproduction rate is slower. The number in the population does help sustain that. And then again, once you get closer up to carrying capacity, then it starts to slow down. Well, in theory, then what we want to be able to do is, if we're going to harvest a resource, we want it here in this middle part of that population. Here on the right-hand side, this picture is referring to specifically fishing, because this is such a big topic, and taking enough fish or that those populations can be sustained versus over harvesting. And how do we go about doing it? Do we go about doing it with large nets? Do we go about doing this as just only allowing sport fishing and those kinds of things? All right. So these are a couple of little diagrams to kind of help you better understand that. So a little bit more about maximum sustainable yield. We want to kind of aim for about half of the carrying capacities, maintain that, so that way there's always room for growth towards that carrying capacity. Animals and plants have MSYs, maximum sustainable yields. Like if you go harvest Christmas trees, it's going to take X number of years for those trees for you to plant a new one and for it to grow to that same size that you had cut down, right? So think of that, paper trees, whatever we use that for. In theory, harvesting, the maximum sustainable yield will permit an indefinite use without depletion of the resource. So meaning that if we hold it right at that MSY, then that's enough where that the population can absolutely replenish itself successfully. But in reality, it's really hard to calculate it because there are so many variables involved. There are going to be things such as weather and climate changes, human intervention, and say if we were to go in and cut out all these trees out here and then build all these little buildings, how is that going to change things? Okay, so MSY is technically very difficult to calculate. It's not as easy as it may seem in concept. So here's a picture that kind of shows you relating to the fishing concept, where around the world, where areas that tend to be over harvested, that would be the red, fished above the maximum sustainable yield. So unfortunately, that is a lot of the European areas. The darker blue is under, and the reason why they are under is it's really because of regulations that have been put into place to help better allow those populations to come back because they were overfished. So this is allowing that repopulation there. And then the light blue is right below it. So it's kind of, they're trying to kind of find where that MSY should be and try not to take too much. This is another picture kind of putting all this together when we're talking about the land use around the world. I showed you the one of the United States. This is showing you around the world. And so you can kind of see specifically where we have different types of protected areas. All the white obviously is not protected, but what we have here in the different colors is showing you that almost 11% of Earth's land is protected in some way, whether it is by national treaties and policies or international, sometimes both.